I always believed that the true measure of a life wasn't written on the plaques we kept or the photographs we staged, but in the texture of an ordinary Tuesday. My name is Caledonia Pierce, Callie to the few friends I still keep close. And, on the first Tuesday of October, the air over Brackenridge, Vermont tasted of wood smoke, frost, and the edges of hurt pride. I am 68 years old, too gray to die, too stubborn to bend, and, if my late husband were still alive, just dangerous enough to keep a town talking. The years since Isaac passed have been carved by the small rituals he left behind. 3 scoops of Sumatra beans ground slow enough to perfume the kitchen, his favorite enamel kettle forever on the back burner, the brass key to the carriage house hung by a loop of ruby twine. I've kept them as though they were spelled charms against loneliness, though some nights the house still creaks with emptiness so sharp it presses right through my sternum. But I never let the silence finish its sentence. There is always some task to muscle through, an invoice to finalize for the antique shop down on Maple Row, a substitute shift at the library when the younger clerks are sick, a walk into the valley orchard where the sky opens like a new page. And then there is Loretta. My sister-in-law, Loretta Pierce, born Harcourt, has a smile like a silver serving spoon, polished, curved, and cold enough to chill the edges of your teeth if you linger too long. Isaac used to joke that she could curdle cream at 40 paces, and though he loved her, how could he not? She was his baby sister. He never trusted the way her eyes glazed over property ledgers the way some women gawk at diamonds in storefront windows. When Isaac died and the estate passed through probate, Loretta buzzed around my doorstep like a wasp hunting sugar water. If I hadn't known better, I'd have thought she was grieving. I do know better. 3 weeks ago, she called to invite, well, perhaps summon is the truer word, me to her daughter Daphne's engagement dinner. The Harcourts are old timber money, though the timber dried up a generation ago. Their house, a hulking faux colonial perched on Ashridge Avenue, balances on that uneasy line between worn grandeur and outright decay. Half the mortar flakes, whenever the winter thaw sets in, but Loretta pretends it's patina. Caledonia, she'd trilled, voice high enough to ping glass. You simply must be there. Daphne wants her dear aunt. It'll be ever so refreshing. I heard the hesitation before the final word. Refreshing. As though my presence were a gust of wind that might either sweep the stale air or topple the fragile facade. I said yes. Because I loved Daphne like the daughter Isaac and I never had. And because I could see Loretta's other motive even through the phone's static. She needed to show the Harcourt elders that despite rumors, the family remained intact, unblemished, moneyed. And I, the widowed keeper of Isaac's substantial life insurance settlement and the silent lien holder of Loretta's oversized mortgage, was proof the line still ran gold. Yes, Loretta's sprawling home belongs to her only on paper. The real deed sits inside my mahogany desk under a velvet band, alongside a notarized contract that declares I am her lender at a cool 3.2%. Isaac drew it up when Loretta begged him 15 years ago for just a little boost to keep the place in the family. He loved her enough to sign. I loved him enough to trust. Looking back, I wonder whether Loretta ever loved anyone in equal measure to her own reflection. Tuesday arrived with a blush of sunrise so crimson it looked scraped from a wound. I wrestled my hair into a low twist, pinned mother of pearl, clips at my temples, and stepped into a midnight blue wool dress that cinched with a narrow sash. Isaac once said I looked like a low-burning star in that dress. It still fit, though my shoulders have bowed and my waist isn't what it used to be. Grief does that. It rearranges you from the inside out until the mirror shows a woman you recognize only by the set of her jaw. I finished lacing my boots when the landline rang. Few people know the number. Fewer still dare use it before noon. I picked up and braced myself. Callie, Loretta breathed my nickname like steam on frosted glass. There's been a teensy change in plans. The, guest list is positively bulging. Fire code, you understand. The caterer, Oh, he's insufferable, insists on strict numbers. I'm devastated. Truly, devastated. As though the quaver in her voice were anything other than choreographed. I drew a long breath, felt the burn of coffee settle in my gut. Loretta, I said, keeping my tone even, are you telling me not to come? A beat of silence, and then the spoon-sharp smile slid through the wire. It's only fair to give Daphne the space she deserves on her night. Too many eyes on an aging matriarch can be distracting. Distracting. She may as well have said unsightly, unwanted, disposable. My lungs filled with a slow, scorching anger that spread behind my ribs like a hearth finally catching flame. I understand, I heard myself say, though what I understood was not what she assumed. I understood the precariousness of her pretense, the exact leverage I held. I understood that the only thing tethering her antique white facade to reality was the monthly check drafted from my account. And I understood, in that moment, that Isaac's gentleness had shaped our arrangement, but Isaac was gone, and the world had turned under my feet until I learned to balance without him. Loretta exhaled a flourish of thanks and prattled something about sending leftovers. I hung up before she finished. For a long minute, I stared at the receiver as though it might apologize for carrying such poison into my ear. Then I set it down, stripped off the midnight blue dress, folded it along the bedspread's edge, and changed into work trousers and a sweater flecked with moth nibbles at the cuffs. I brewed fresh coffee, strong enough to tarnish silver, and carried the mug into Isaac's study. The study remains exactly as he left it. Cherry wood shelves sagging under first editions, his fountain pen uncapped beside a half-finished letter to the New England Botanical Society, the reading chair angled toward morning light. Dust motes drifted through the slanting glow like slow comets, and I could almost pretend he'd return any second, patent leather shoes clicking, to ask why I wasn't dressed for Daphne's party. Instead, I opened the roll-top desk, extracted the folder-stamped loan agreement, Loretta Pierce, and laid the crisp pages flat. I skimmed the amortization schedule, the balance due, the interest clause Isaac insisted we lower so Loretta wouldn't feel burdened. My pulse thudded in my throat. I thought of Loretta's powder-sharp face, the way she once squeezed my hand at Isaac's funeral with more calculation than comfort. I thought of the long, silent nights since, the debts paid in loneliness. And more than anything, I thought of Daphne, whose sweetness had nothing to do with the rot that bred it. Perhaps Loretta believed age dulled a woman, filed her down to soft angles and harmlessness. She forgot that pressure hardens, tempers. Diamonds, steel, seasoned wood, all stronger for the weight. I reached for Isaac's fountain pen, felt its heft settle into my grip, and began drafting a letter of foreclosure. Not because I intended to collect, but because I wanted the power of the gesture. The first draft ran hot. Scathing sentences gnashed with righteous fury. Halfway through, I stopped, dipped the nib in fresh ink, and rewrote each line with surgical calm. Facts, dates, obligations, polite legalese, the mask Loretta knew so well. When the letter was finished, I placed it, unsigned, beside the deed. The sun had climbed past the sycamore, and the shadows in the study shortened until they resembled the shape of an open mouth swallowing everything in its path. I walked to the kitchen, rinsed Isaac's mug, set it upside down on the drying rack, and retrieved an old envelope from the junk drawer. It was addressed to me, from the Franklin Savings Bank, postmarked more than a decade ago. I slid it open and slipped inside the foreclosure notice. Then I did something I hadn't done since Isaac's last night in the hospital. I stepped out onto the back porch, lit a match, and held the envelope above the ashtray we kept for guests who came in. From Boston with city habits. The flame kissed the paper and raced across Loretta's name, curling it into black petals. Amber sparks floated upward, and the letter collapsed inward until nothing remained but a brittle circle of char. Ash drifted over the porch rail, carried by the October wind toward Loretta's side of town. I inhaled the acrid scent and felt, for the first time in 3 years, something like equilibrium. Not joy, too early for that, but balance, the sense of a scale finally tipping back to center. Yet a spark survived, buried in the embering mass, and as it glowed, I knew the gesture wasn't enough. Loretta would never feel the singe of that flame. She would only feel the absence of my presence, easily dismissed. She needed, instead, to feel the absence of something she assumed eternal. I returned to the study, drew out a blank sheet of my linen stationery, and composed a second letter. This one thanked Franklin Savings for their years of service and notified them of my intention to liquidate the loan remainder effective immediately, clearing the Pierce account and closing all associated reminders. I did the math twice. Principal, outstanding, interest accrued, penalties waived. A lump sum large enough to scorch the edges of Loretta's reality. When the ink dried, I signed in a hand so steady it surprised me. Then I folded the letter, slipped it into fresh envelope, and pressed my signet seal, Isaac's family crest, into the wax. I set the envelope atop my leather satchel. The 4:30 post pickup would pass the corner by Whitaker's pharmacy. I would be there. My wristwatch ticked toward 11. In 6 hours, Loretta would raise her crystal flute to toast her daughter's engagement, smug in the belief she'd pruned the guest list of unflattering outliers. By dawn tomorrow, a crimson notice would hit her mailbox. Loan closed at lender's discretion. That same crimson would bloom in her cheeks when she realized closed meant gone, and with it, the charitable interest rate. The bank would seize. The note, reassess, and, without my buffer, call in the balloon payment. I imagined Loretta's spoon-sharp smile cracking. But Daphne, sweet Daphne. She didn't deserve to have her celebration eclipsed. Something in me pinched at that thought, and I wondered if spite could bruise a soul. I pocketed the regret for later examination. A surgeon can worry about scars only after removing the tumor. Besides, the letter was sealed. I left the study, donned my winter coat, and locked the front door behind me. Brackenridge Main Street spread out like a quilt stitched by familiar hands. The stone library flanked by crimson maples, the greengrocer's awning striped lime and cream, the bakery exhaling cinnamon into cold air. Every building nodded as I passed, as though the town knew I carried a spark that might burn or warm, depending on how I used it. At Whitaker's corner, the postbox stood sentinel. I hovered, envelope poised. The slot gaped like an open throat. A single shove, and there would be no turning back without a federal offense. My pulse throbbed so loud I feared passers-by might hear. I thought of Isaac, gentle, kind, ever hopeful. Isaac, who once said the most radical act a person can do is withdraw grace from the ungrateful. Mercy isn't an infinite well, he'd told me during one of Loretta's earlier dramas. Sometimes you have to let it run dry so the fool learns thirst. I slid the envelope into the dark and heard it vanish with a paper hush. The air tasted sharper, like biting a penny. I realized I'd been holding my breath and exhaled a plume that dissolved in the wan sunlight. From across the street, Mrs. Edgemont waved, unaware of the small apocalypse I'd just initiated. I waved back and forced my feet toward the bakery. I needed a cinnamon cruller, a talisman of sweetness against the impending storm. Inside, the warmth fogged my glasses. The counter boy, Milo, smiled. "Your usual dozen, Miss Pierce?" "4 today," I said. "Treats are sweeter in moderation." He boxed them, tied the string. I paid and left, the bell chiming my exit. As the door shut, I glanced at the reflection in the glass. A woman silver-haired, eyes lit not with vengeance but purpose. The street's linden trees rattled dry leaves like faulty maracas. Somewhere, a car backfired. Life ambled on, ignorant. I headed home, each step lighter than the last. The cruller grease spotted the paper bag, warm against my fingers. For the first time in ages, I hummed, Some old jazz tune Isaac loved, though I could never remember its title. When I reached my porch, I paused. The afternoon sun washed the clapboards a gentle gold, as though forgiving the chipped paint. I climbed the steps, key poised. A dark sedan idled at the curb. The passenger door opened, and Daphne stepped out, her auburn hair pinned in an elegant twist that didn't suit her at all. She had on a seafoam dress I recognized from Loretta's closet swap meets. Her eyes shone with panic. "Aunt Callie," she called, tripping on the hem as she hurried up the walk. "I need to talk to you. Now." My stomach sank. Her cheeks were blotched, mascara smudged along one cheekbone. She'd been crying. She reached me, breath clouding. "I'm so sorry," she gulped. I didn't know she'd... Tires squealed as the sedan sped off, leaving exhaust curling. I guided her inside. The cruller bag dropped to the foyer table. Daphne wrung her hands, diamond ring flashing. "What happened?" I asked, though. Dread already whispered possibilities. Something in her eyes flickered like a candle guttering. Mother. She told me what she said to you." Daphne's voice fractured. "I confronted her. We fought. Then she threatened to..." She swallowed. "To cut the down payment for the new house unless I uninvite you and return this ring." Loretta's cruelty never surprised me, but still managed to wound. I reached for Daphne's chilled hands. "What do you want, darling?" "I want my family," she whispered. "All of it. But Mother's adamant. She said you'd understand. You have your hobbies, your solitude." She said... Tears brimmed. She said you were too sad for celebrations. Too sad. As though grief were a mold that might spoil the cake. I felt the ember of resolve flare. Daphne sensed it. She squeezed harder. "Aunt Callie, whatever. You decide. Please don't disappear. I'll move the party, elope, anything." A clock chimed 3 rooms away. Somewhere, the post truck was already crossing out of town. I brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "Come," I said softly. "Let's make tea. Then we'll talk about how to handle a woman who mistakes kindness for weakness." As we stepped into the kitchen, the porch boards creaked behind us. I froze. Daphne turned, eyes wide. Through the slatted window, I saw Loretta herself mounting the steps, fox fur stole clasped over her shoulders, eyes bright as cut glass. She lifted a hand and knocked once, sharp, imperious, on my door. The sound reverberated through my bones. I inhaled, squared my shoulders, and moved toward the foyer. Daphne whispered. She followed me. Oh God, she followed me. Loretta's second knock rang, a gavel. Beyond it, I sensed the fracture lines crawling across her world and mine. I reached the knob, feeling the weight of every decision crystallize to this moment. I opened the door. "Caledonia," Loretta greeted, voice smooth as syrup laced with arsenic. Behind her smile, panic darted like cornered prey. "We need to chat. Immediately." Her gaze stole past me, catching the cruller bag, Daphne's. Trembling form and, though she could not see, perhaps the faint trace of ash still clinging to my cuff. I lifted my chin. "Inside or out here, Loretta?" "Inside," she said, stepping forward uninvited. As the door clicked shut behind her, the house seemed to hold its breath. Wood and plaster braced for the collision of long-banked fires. Loretta opened her mouth, but whatever she intended was lost, because in that instant the doorbell chimed. All 3 of us turned. Through the frosted pane, a courier in blue uniform waited, certified letter in hand, and I knew with bone-deep certainty whose name lay inked across that envelope. The storm was arriving faster than I'd predicted. My heartbeat thundered like a war drum as I reached for the latch. The moment my fingers touched metal, I understood. There would be no gentle fade to resolution. Only blaze, ash, and from it, whatever new form I would forge. The latch clicked. Before, We jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Very well. We'll finalize by close of business. Haskins hung up before I could reply. I returned the receiver to its cradle with deliberate grace, though my heart now jackhammered. Loretta had taken another loan, likely to finance the very soiree from which she banned me. The brazenness astonished even me. She gnawed her lip, drawing a bead of red along the perfect lipstick line. Caledonia, The lamp flickered. Thunder cracked so loud the walls shuddered. Loretta jumped, and the letter slipped from her fingers. Daphne stooped, retrieved it, folding it carefully. When her mother reached for the page, Daphne held firm. "You took another loan?" Daphne asked, voice trembling, not with fear, but with anger I'd never heard from her before. "It was short-term," Loretta stammered. "For the engagement dinner. Appearances." "Appearances?" Daphne echoed. "You borrowed against the house so you could impress the Harcourts?" Rain hammered harder, as though the sky itself denounced the folly. Loretta buried her face in her hands. "You don't understand." "No," Daphne replied, eyes glistening. "I don't." The ledger clock told 4, a hollow, resonant chime. My gaze drifted to the front windows. Water streamed down the glass in racing tributaries, blurring the silhouette of the street beyond. Then, through the blur, headlights flared and lurched onto the curb. A dark SUV idled, wipers whipping. The passenger door opened, and 2 men in suits emerged, shields of folders clutched against rain. "Visitors," I murmured. Loretta stood too fast. Vertigo swayed her. "That's Earl Weston, my attorney." "And the other?" I asked. She swallowed. "Haskins." She hadn't warned them off in time. Daphne exhaled sharply. "Mother, please sit." But Loretta bolted toward the foyer. Halfway across the rug, her heel snagged in the fringe. She stumbled, pitched forward. My body moved before thought, intercepting, catching her elbow. The impact jarred my shoulder. Pain shot up through old bones. Loretta sagged against me, breath ragged. Her eyes, once flinty, now looked like shattered bottle glass. "I can't," she whispered. "They'll take everything." Lightning flashed again, a strobe that illuminated her panic in grisly detail. The doorbell rang. Not a polite chime, but a sustained, impatient buzz. Loretta stiffened. Then, quite suddenly, she went limp. For a heartbeat, I thought she merely swooned. Then her knees buckled fully, and the side of her head struck my collarbone as she collapsed. "Mother!" Daphne screamed, rushing forward. I eased Loretta to the floor. Her face blanched, lips blue, at the edges. She gasped, clawing at her chest. "Angina," she rasped. "Pills. In purse." Daphne tore open the crocodile handbag dropped near the settee, rifling through cosmetics and receipts until her fingers closed around a small orange vial. She shook 2 tablets free. Loretta gulped them dry, but relief did not follow. Instead, her eyes rolled and her body convulsed with a spasm that racked her shoulders. I pressed 2 fingers to her carotid. The pulse pounded, erratic, staccato. "Call emergency," I ordered. Daphne scrambled for her phone. The doorbell blared again, incongruous in its civility amid the crisis. "Get them in," I barked to Daphne as she tapped 911. "Haskins can help." She opened the door. Rain gusted forth, soaking the foyer. Tiles. The men strode inside, their umbrellas uselessly folded. "Chest pains," I said before they could speak. "We need nitro or a defibrillator if you've got one in that SUV." Weston, a stooped man with eyebrows like caterpillars, knelt. Haskins, the banker, backed toward the door, face pallid. "I'll fetch the AED from the car." He splashed into the storm. Loretta's breaths came in wet, shallow rasps. "Caledonia," she gurgled. "Don't let them." "Shh," I said. My hand smoothed hair from her forehead, streaking raindrops and sweat. Focus on breathing, she gripped, my wrist with surprising strength. Promise me, she croaked. What? Promise you won't let them take my home. Her rings dug into my skin. The pain anchored me. I swallowed words I wasn't ready to offer. Sirens wailed in the distance, drawing nearer, Doppler steeped. Rain thrummed a relentless percussion on the roof, each beat a countdown. Lights flickered overhead, once, twice, and died. The house plunged into candle-dim gloom, only the hearth's cold grate reflecting the ghost of lightning. In the dark, Loretta's eyes shimmered, pupils dilating. Hold on, I whispered. The siren crescendoed. Brakes squealed. Glass rattled as paramedics burst through the doorway, voices barking protocol. A gurney materialized, straps unbuckled. Loretta's grip on my wrist loosened as hands in blue gloves lifted her. She didn't release me willingly. The paramedic pried her fingers free. I'm riding with her, I told them. Daphne nodded, pale but determined. I'll follow. As we maneuvered the gurney through the threshold, Loretta's attorney called after me, voice sharp with opportunism. Mrs. Pierce, we must discuss the foreclosure tonight. There are procedural options. The ambulance. Doors slammed, muting his words. Inside, the vehicle smelled of antiseptic and rain-damp wool. Monitor leads adhered to Loretta's clavicles, the screen tracing erratic peaks. Her eyelids fluttered. She looked at me, something like pleading pooling behind the pain. The vehicle lurched into motion. Neon lights from storefronts smeared across, the wet windows like watercolor tears. Sirens' howl cleaved the night, and every block we sped through felt like another layer peeled back from the life I thought I'd finally steadied. Loretta coughed, lips mottled. Caledonia, she rasped. I'm here. Promise me, she whispered, or I'll tell them. About the carriage house. A chill sluiced my spine colder than the ambulance AC. What about the carriage house? I asked, but she slipped unconscious, breath rattling like loose shutters in a gale. I stared at her slack face. Carriage house? My mind clawed through. Memories, Isaac's domain, his sanctuary of pressed flowers and weather instruments. What secret could Loretta leverage from that place? Lightning forked across the sky again, illuminating her for half a second. She looked both frail and dangerous, a glass dagger poised on the brink of shattering. I clenched the gurney railing, the metal vibrating with each pothole. Somewhere behind us, Daphne's car followed, twin headlights refracting in the storm. Loretta's threat reverberated in my skull. Something about the carriage house I had yet to discover, but which she believed could sway me into mercy. The ambulance veered left, tires hissing over pooled water. Hospital floodlights loomed ahead, stark against the storm-bruised sky, and inside my chest, a pressure built. Not dread, but a fierce determination to unearth every hidden root Loretta had planted in my soil. But first, I had to ensure she survived long enough to face the harvest. The ambulance doors swung open, and rain hammered the pavement like artillery fire as the paramedics raced her inside. I followed, heart pounding, thoughts tangled, the storm outside matching the one inside. My own skin. Loretta's last half-formed threat echoed in my ears. All I could hear over sirens and thunder and the slap of shoes on linoleum was that single, ominous word. Carriage. The ER doors yawned, swallowed us, sealed, and everything dissolved into chaos. Chaos wasn't even the right word for the storm of sound and movement that swallowed us whole as we burst through the sliding doors of Brackenridge General. Nurses shouted vitals across the corridor. Fluorescent lights stuttered above, casting jittering shadows that made every figure seem doubled, tripled, a kaleidoscope of urgency. Rainwater slicked the linoleum beneath our shoes, and the gurney wheels screeched as the paramedics pivoted past triage toward the trauma bay. Loretta lay motionless beneath the straps, skin the yellow-gray of clay left too long in the sun. Electrodes clung to her chest, But the monitor rebelled, flashing error codes amid jagged, inconsistent lines. One nurse pumped air through a mask, another bolted down the hall for cardiology. Daphne arrived seconds later, drenched, mascara bleeding, twilight corridors down her cheeks. She latched onto my sleeve, eyes wild. She's hanging on, I said, though my pulse disagreed, hammering a future I refused to accept, at least not on Loretta's terms. An orderly thrust a clipboard between us. Next of kin? Daphne Pierce, I answered, guiding her trembling hand to the paperwork. The pen slipped once, twice. She steadied, signed. They whisked Loretta beyond a curtain. A physician, skinny, over-caffeinated, swept in behind, palms already gloved. The curtain snicked shut, sealing us outside with the antiseptic stink and our own separate terrors. We found 2 metal chairs beneath a sputtering light. Daphne collapsed, elbows on knees. Rainwater dripped from her hem, forming an irregular constellation on the tile. "Tell me about the carriage house," I said. Her head lifted, brow furrowed. "What?" She threatened to expose something about it if I didn't save her home. I don't know," Daphne stammered. "Father? Kept old ledgers out there, didn't he?" "He did," I murmured. But Isaac was meticulous. Nothing illicit. Daphne massaged her temples. "Maybe she's bluffing." "Loretta rarely gambles without an ace," I replied. We lapsed into silence. Through the curtain, machines bleeped a frantic counterpoint to the thunder outside. Every rise of pitch sent Daphne's shoulders jerking. An hour crawled by, then another. Finally, the physician re-emerged, peeling gloves. "We stabilized her," he announced. "Myocardial infarction. Major, but contained. She'll need cath. Lab first thing, probable stent." His gaze softened. "She asked for you." Daphne exhaled a sob of relief that knotted into laughter halfway out her throat. I squeezed her hand. "Go," I said. "She needs her daughter." But she threatened. "She's still your mother." Daphne rose, straightened rain-ruined dress, and followed the doctor. I remained, alone with the electric hum. Lightning spidered across the atrium skylight, the flash illuminating every fingerprint on the glass. My reflection stared back, eyes hollowed by sleepless years, silver hair wilted with rain. I felt ancient and unbreakable in the same breath. Somewhere, beyond these walls, the bank's gears kept grinding, oblivious to coronary arteries and broken families. Haskins and Weston would draft motions, file injunctions. Dawn would find Loretta's financial life bleeding in a different theater. I stood and paced until the fluorescent hum nested inside my skull. Finally, I turned toward the exit. Air. I needed air. Outside, the storm had slackened to a cold drizzle. Street lamps puddled gold on the asphalt, and the scent of wet pine drifted from the hospital's landscaping. My car sat beneath a maple, leaves plastered across the windshield like damp confetti. I slid behind the wheel and stared at the dashboard clock. 11:47 p.m. The engagement dinner would be ending now. Champagne flutes abandoned, musicians packing cellos. Guests would whisper about Loretta's absence, about ambulances. Brackenridge thrived on data disguised as empathy. The carriage house key jangled against the spare on my ring. The building sat barely 200 yards behind my home, but I hadn't set foot inside since Isaac's funeral. He'd asked me once, gently, to leave it untouched for a year, some personal ritual of closure. The year stretched to 3 in the blur of morning. Tonight, the lock demanded turning. I started the engine. Midnight painted the valley black when I pulled into my gravel drive. The main house loomed ahead, windows dark. Only the porch light glowed, a sentinel left for Daphne's eventual return. I followed the flagstone path around the ivy-wrapped corner. The carriage house emerged, 2-story, cedar-sided, roof-crowned with a widow's walk. Gentle rain chattered on slate shingles. My flashlight beam bobbed across warped doors. I pressed the key into the padlock. Metal teeth met resistance. Rust protested. A sharp twist, and the shackle gave. The doors moaned open. Cold, dry air exhaled, or perhaps inhaled me in a rush of dust and memory. Rows of planters lined one wall, orchids long desiccated. Weather instruments gleamed. Isaac's, anemometers, barographs, antique thermoscopes. A leather-topped workbench dominated the center, every drawer labeled in his decisive hand. I clicked the doors shut, trapping the world outside. With gentle reverence, I crossed the floorboards. The wood complained underfoot, but the house felt more like silence returning to speech than protest. On the workbench, a single envelope lay propped against a brass rain gauge. My name inked across in Isaac's slanted script. My breath caught. Hands shaking, I opened it. Inside, a letter and a safety deposit box key stamped with the crest of Brackenridge First National. Caledonia, the letter began, "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you have finally come to the place I loved most. I kept secrets here, not from you, but for you. Should Loretta ever press you with threats about this carriage house, know that her fear is not of what I hid, but of what she did." My throat tightened. Rain ticked on the windows like a clock. The letter continued. I discovered discrepancies in Mother's old trust, the one Loretta managed. Funds were siphoned to offshore accounts. I traced enough to confront her, but the heart attack came before I could decide. I left the evidence in a deposit box, together with my recorded statement attesting to her signature forgeries. Only you possess the other key. Lightning flared, bleaching the rafters in ghost light. The letter's final lines. I'm sorry to leave this burden, but you carry strength like others carry breath. Use this if ever you need leverage for peace. I pressed the paper to my chest, feeling the weight of his faith like armor. A floorboard popped behind me. I spun. My flashlight beam cut a sharp arc across the room, settling on emptiness. Only the eye. Shadows moved, swelling as the storm's breath pushed through cracks. I exhaled, pulse sprinting. Clutching the key, I folded Isaac's letter into my coat pocket. Another sound, this time subtle, fabric brushing against wood. Definitely not the house settling. "Who's there?" I called. No answer, just the rain. I stepped backward toward the bench, fingers groping for the heavy brass rain gauge. My hand closed around cold metal, then a creak above. The widow's walk hatch? Someone on the upper level. I raised the flashlight. "I've called 911, I lied, voice steady. "Identify yourself." Silence. Then, deliberate footsteps descended the narrow servant staircase at the rear. Slow, unavoidable. The beam caught boots, dark denim, the hem of a sodden trench. My eyes tracked upward to a face half obscured by the flashlight's glare. A man, mid-40s, square jaw, a scar like an exclamation mark along his cheekbone. Not Weston, not Haskins. He smiled, though the expression never reached his eyes. "Evening, Mrs. Pierce. Who are you?" "A friend," he lied smoothly. Rainwater dripped from his hair, making little ticking sounds on the floorboards. Tightened my grip on the gauge. Friends announced themselves at front doors. "Ah," he said, stepping closer, "but you invited me in the moment you unlocked that padlock." Another step, and I smelled diesel, damp wool. "What do you want?" My voice didn't shake. If anything, it felt honed. His gaze flicked to the key in my fist. Just that. Wind battered the walls, rattling windows. "And if I refuse?" I asked. His smile showed a canine tooth capped in gold. "You won't?" I weighed the gauge in my palm, muscle memory recalling the croquet mallets of my youth. Then I made a choice Isaac might have scolded, yet understood. I lowered my arm, palm up, the key gleaming on my lifeline. "Come take it." He raised an eyebrow bemused. Close the distance. I waited until he was close enough that I could smell the tobacco caught in the fibers of his coat. Then I snapped the beam off, plunging us into pitch. He cursed. With my left hand, I pitched the heavy gauge across the room. Metal clanged against shelving, echoing. Instinct pulled his attention toward the sound. In that sliver of distraction, I pivoted, bolting for the doors. Footsteps thundered. Behind, as the room strobed with the returning flashlight, he'd found the switch, chasing me in bursts of light and dark. My fingers scraped the latch. Too slow. A rough hand seized the collar of my coat, yanking me backward. I twisted, slamming an elbow into ribs, felt the dull thump, heard the grunt, but his grip did not loosen. Feisty, he rasped. I kicked at his shin. He deflected. In the struggle, the key flew, skittering beneath a planter. He shoved me against the workbench. My spine met oak. Breath fled in a whoosh. His forearm pinned my shoulders. Where'd it go? He snarled. Hell if I know, I gasped. Lightning flashed. His pupils blew wide, animal. He thrust a hand into my coat pockets, found Isaac's letter. His gaze skimmed the parchment. Recognition bloomed, a flicker of worry. Give me that, I snapped. He tucked it inside his coat instead. My palm brushed metal. The brass rain gauge rolled against my hip when I threw it. I fisted the handle. He caught the movement. Too late? For him. I swung upward. The gauge connected with his temple in a steel kiss. Bone met brass. He staggered, eyes wide, blood blooming like dark petals across his brow. He stumbled back, tripping over the edge of the planter stand. The wood collapsed. Soil burst like a flower of earth. He hit the floorboards with a crack that echoed thunder. I waited, chest heaving. He groaned, but didn't rise. My hand darted beneath the planter shards, closing around the key, slick with mud, but intact. Sirens wailed somewhere distant. Whether police or ambulance, I couldn't tell. The man rolled onto an elbow, blood painting his cheek. You have no idea, he muttered, voice slurring, what that key unlocks. I have every idea, I said, backing toward the doors. I cinched the padlock behind me, trapping him inside like a splinter in old wood. Rain greeted me with icy applause. I pocketed the key, cradling my bruised ribs, and ran for the house. Inside, I slammed the kitchen door and collapsed against it. Lungs dragging storm-cold oxygen, the letter, gone, stolen. But the key remained, and Isaac's words etched themselves clearer in memory than ink on page. Footsteps pounded the front porch. I whipped around as the doorknob rattled, a shadow blotting the glass panes. A familiar voice, Weston, the attorney, called, "My name." Before I could respond, a crash reverberated from the carriage house. Wood splintering, hinges tearing free. My heart raced a staccato drumbeat. Weston's silhouette froze, then turned his head toward the yard. Lights flared. Flashlights, multiple beams slicing rain. The night erupted with shouts. "Drop it! Hands where I can see!" Police. I pressed a palm to the cool window, trying to parse the chaos outside when a single, unmistakable click whispered, inches from my ear, a revolver's hammer drawn back. I went rigid. A cold barrel pressed into the thin skin where skull meets ear. Loretta's banker, Haskins, stepped from the pantry shadows, eyes flat, mouth a straight wire. "Keys and hands on the table, Mrs. Pierce," he said. Slow. My pulse roared like a cataract. I complied, setting the key on the farmhouse table between us. His gaze flicked to it, then back to me, finger tense on the trigger. Outside, police orders barked. Somewhere, glass shattered. Thunder boomed. Haskins smiled a smile without temperature. "Let's make this simple," he whispered. "After all, nobody needs to die over family business." Lightning illuminated the kitchen, his face pale, mine reflected in the steel refrigerator, eyes wild. My mind raced for options, each one crashing against that gunmetal certainty. And then, behind Haskins, the back door I had locked moments earlier cracked open. Slick, silent. A hand slipped through, grasping for the key. Haskins didn't notice, his attention riveted to my breathing, my fear. I held his eyes, willing them not to move. The intruding hand clenched around the key and vanished like a conjurer's trick. My stomach plunged. Friend or foe? Impossible to know. Haskins's radio crackled at his belt. He flinched, and in that fractional distraction I lunged sideways, toppling a chair into his knees. The gun barked, deafening, hot flash lighting the world white. The bullet shattered the ceramic mixing bowl on the counter. Porcelain rained across us. I hit the floor, ears ringing, air knocked from my lungs. Haskins cursed, stumbled, regained posture. "Don't make me!" The front door burst inward, police flooding, weapons raised. "Drop it!" they roared. Haskins spun, pistol half lowered, indecision flickering. From the hallway, Daphne emerged, tear-streaked, face drained, seeing the tableau, screaming, "Stop!" In the same heartbeat, Haskins's gaze darted back to me. The calculus of risk, of leverage, he pointed the gun, and a single concussive shot thundered, but not from his barrel. Haskins's eyes widened in shock. He looked down, a crimson, bloom spreading across his chest, as though someone had spilled wine. His fingers slackened. The gun clattered to hard wood. He wavered, knees folding, collapsed. Smoke curled in the kitchen air, smelling of cordite and rain. Behind him, Weston lowered a pocket pistol, hand shaking, face ashen. He was going to kill her, the attorney whispered, almost to himself. Police swarmed, shouts overlapping. Handcuffs clicked around Weston's wrists even as paramedics rushed to Haskins. Daphne sank to her knees beside me, sobbing. I tried to comfort her, but my gaze drifted to the doorway. The key was gone, the thief unseen. The room spun, adrenaline bleeding away, leaving cold dread in its place. Somewhere outside, the carriage house crackled as flames licked up its cedar siding. A lightning strike? Arson. My mind couldn't settle. Smoke seeped through the broken window, carrying the scent of burning secrets. I clutched my daughter-in-law. No, my daughter. Close, as police radios chattered code over the chaos. The key lay somewhere in the dark, and with it, the proof that could topple everything, or save us all. Sirens wailed anew, fire engines barreling up the drive. And in the pulse of red lights strobing across the walls, I understood. This night had split our lives into before and after. No matter the fires we quelled, new ones kindled in the shadows. I met Daphne's terrified eyes. "We're not done," I whispered. Of course we weren't. So many doors left to open, so many weapons left to turn. The paramedic's voice blurred over me, asking about shock, blood pressure. But all I could hear, repeating like thunder in my skull, was the whisper of that key leaving my grasp, and the echo of Isaac's warning. Use this if ever you need leverage for peace. The fluorescent lights. Above me dissolved into spinning halos, white swallowing color. My vision tunneled, sound drained. The last thing I felt before the darkness claimed me was the phantom, icy press of gunmetal against my temple. Pain delivered me back to consciousness with all the gentleness of a slammed door. First, there was the throbbing behind my eyes, each pulse a kettle drum in a parade I'd never joined. Then the antiseptic sting in my nostrils, mingling with burned cedar and cordite memories that refused to dissipate. I opened my eyes to fluorescent panels overhead and a plastic curtain half ringed around the bed. The curtain's weave caught the harsh light, scattering it so that the world looked spun from shards of ice. Voices murmured at the foot of the bed, professional tones clipped of emotion. A detective and a doctor, debating pain thresholds and witness statements. I remained motionless, letting their words seep into me like dye, coloring every blank about the night. "No through and through, thank God," the doctor was saying. "Rib contusion, mild concussion. Observation for 48 hours, then release. She'll need to give a statement when she's able," the detective replied. "Our shooter claims self-defense. The banker's in surgery. Touch and go." Banker? Haskins? The gun? The crash? The lost key? Memory sluiced back in pieces. I inhaled sharply, the motion igniting a white-hot filament of pain in my side. The curtain whisked aside. Detective Mara Sullivan, a woman whose bun was so tight it felt like an act of hostility, peered down at me. Her eyes were the color of slate under rain. "Ms. Pierce, you're awake." "More's the pity," I croaked. My throat felt lined with gravel. "Is Daphne safe?" "She's in the family room with coffee that tastes like regret," Detective Sullivan said. "Your sister-in-law is stable. The carriage house is a loss. Fire department contained it to the structure." A loss. Isaac's instruments, orchids, journals, incinerated. Grief threatened to breach, but something fiercer welded it shut. Resolve. Because the key was gone, and whoever took it still walked free. Sullivan withdrew. A notebook. "Tell me what you remember after the paramedics arrived." I recounted it in order. Loretta's collapse, Weston's arrival, the intruder in the carriage house, the scuffle, the stolen letter, Haskins with the gun, Weston's shot. As my voice rasped through the details, the detective's pen raced, punctuating the air with soft scratches. When I finished, she tapped the page. "Any idea who the intruder was?" "None. Mid-40s, scar on the right cheek. Professional menace. Could Weston have hired him?" "I doubt Weston has the spine to hire a grocery delivery, let alone muscle. But I could be wrong." Sullivan closed the notebook. "We found blood outside the carriage house, 2 trails. One leads toward the woods behind your property. We'll have dogs out at first light." She hesitated. "The structure fire was set with accelerant, Ms. Pierce. Someone wanted your memories gone." "Not just memories, evidence. Isaac's evidence." "Detective," I said, "my husband left materials in a safe deposit box at Brackenridge First National. I possess one key. The other was stolen tonight, along with a letter that explains its significance. If someone opens that box before I do," she nodded, "I'll place a guard with the bank manager. No access until you're present." I exhaled, tension loosening one strand. Day seeped into the sky in watery strokes when Daphne tiptoed into the ward. She looked 20 years older than her 20-something reflection ordinarily allowed. Dark crescents under her eyes, trembling hands wrapped around a paper cup. She sat on the edge of my bed, careful not to jar the IV. "Mother keeps asking." "For you," she whispered. "She survived the stent?" "2 of them," Daphne said. "Cardiologist says she'll need weeks of rehab, but she's asking for you by name." I closed my eyes, fatigue pressing like a lead blanket. "Tell her I'll see her after the detective finishes gnawing my bones." Daphne's lips quirked. An attempt at a smile. Then her gaze slid to the bandage at my temple, and her facade fractured. "I'm so sorry," she choked. "If I hadn't begged you to—" I covered her hand with mine. "Stop. None of this is yours to carry." "But—" "The key, Isaac's evidence. We'll retrieve it," I assured. Though how, I hadn't a map, only the compass of determination. They discharged me 30 hours later, against hospital wisdom, but with Detective Sullivan's escort. Daphne drove us to the bank in Loretta's battered sedan. The interior smelled of vanilla and stale tears. Sullivan's cruiser followed like a guardian shadow. Bank manager Ellis met us at the doors, cheeks flushed from a night without sleep. "Ms. Pierce, detective. I've secured Vault 4A as instructed." He glanced at Daphne, then away, as though expecting tragedy to be contagious. We descended to the vault. The air was colder here, each breath a puff of frost in my lungs. Sullivan positioned 2 uniformed officers at the corridor entrance. The safe deposit attendant retrieved my box, long, steel, anonymous. He slid it into a private viewing booth, nodded, and retreated. Sullivan tested the door to ensure privacy, then turned to me. "Moment of truth, Ms. Pierce." My hand shook as I slid my key into the right slot. It turned with a snick, familiar as a pulse. Sullivan inserted the guard key beside mine. Together, we withdrew the heavy lid. Inside, not ledgers, not paper. Only a single black USB drive sealed in static-proof plastic and a familiar leather-bound journal, the one Isaac always claimed he took to his grave. Underneath lay a SD card labeled Violet 17B. Sullivan raised an eyebrow. "May I?" I nodded. She gloved, lifted the journal, flipping pages. Numbers, offshore entities, signatures, forged in Loretta's spidery script. Enough to detonate several lives. "And the flash drive?" she asked. "Video, probably," Isaac's statement. I pocketed it along with the SD card. "Until chain of custody is formalized, this stays with me." Sullivan hesitated. "For now," she conceded. The detective's radio crackled. A voice barked codes that made her shoulders tense. "Trouble?" I asked. She pressed a finger to her earpiece, listened, then muttered a curse. "Weston made bail 2 hours ago, gone before the paperwork cooled. Who posted? Anonymous cashier's check. And Haskins is awake. Lawyered up." I stowed the journal in my handbag. "Then we moved swiftly." Loretta occupied a private suite bathed in peach lamplight. Oxygen hissed softly from nasal cannula. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen, like a shell left behind by a vibrant creature. Daphne lingered at the window while I pulled a chair to the bed. Loretta's lids fluttered. "You came?" she croaked. "Of course." Her gaze drifted to the bruise along my jaw. "I never wanted you harmed." Yet harm arrived, wearing your debts like a coat. Tears filled her eyes, real tears, not the glycerin kind. "Caledonia, they're going to destroy me. Weston said the bank will accelerate foreclosure. And there's more. Loans I never meant to sign, but they forged." She swallowed, wincing. "Help me." I leaned close. Isaac left. Evidence, powerful enough to tip the scale. But a man came for it. "Tell me who he works for." Her fingers twitched, seeking mine. I allowed it, cold skin to warm. "The Harcourt patriarch," she whispered. "Daphne's future father-in-law. If my bankruptcy stains their brand, the engagement dies. He'll do anything to keep the rot hidden." I sat back, icy clarity blooming. Money old enough to remember prohibition, deep enough to drown new trouble. "Of course." "Why target the carriage house?" I asked. "Because he thought the proof was there," Weston told him. "Haskins brokered introductions." I squeezed her, hand until knuckles whitened. "You played chess on a field lined with mines, Loretta. The blast was inevitable." She closed her eyes. "Save Daphne, whatever the cost." "Rest," I said. "I'll handle the storm." Daphne drove me home beneath a pewter sky bruised by autumn. The house wore scars, plywood over the shattered kitchen window, yellow police tape across the ruined carriage house skeleton. Charred beams jutted like burned ribs. I unlocked the door, stepping into silence fractured by soot smell. Daphne trailed, fingertips grazing the wall as if afraid the house itself might crumble. I set the journal on the dining table. "We start scanning these pages. Detective Sullivan will need digital copies. The originals stay with me." Daphne wiped her eyes. "I'll make coffee." While she clattered mugs, I booted Isaac's ancient desktop, thankfully spared bullets and fire. The drive groaned, fans whining like bees awakening. I cracked the journal's spine and began photographing. Pages with my phone, transferring each image to the computer. Accounts, transfer paths, shell corporations. Isaac's meticulous handwriting guiding me through the labyrinth. Hours slipped, daylight thinning to pewter dusk. Daphne dozed on the sofa among printouts, highlighter uncapped in her fist. A floorboard creaked upstairs. I froze, scanner lid mid-lift. The house should be empty. I reached into the drawer for the kitchen shears, the only weapon not confiscated. Quiet as snowfall, I crept to the stairwell. Another creak, a breath. Someone moved in Isaac's study. I ascended, heart a piston. The door to the study stood ajar. Lamplight glowed within. I edged forward, shears raised. A tall silhouette rifled the roll-top desk, papers shuffling. He turned at the sweep of the floorboard under my weight. Weston. His suit hung wrinkled, eyes sunken. No weapon visible. "Ms. Pierce?" he greeted, voice hoarse. "We need to talk before darker forces arrive." I did not lower the shears. "You bailed yourself out to ransack me?" "I bailed out to protect myself," Weston said. "And you, they're coming." "They?" "The Harcourts hired contractors far worse than the man you clobbered. They want that evidence, and they'll bleed anyone in their way." He stepped into lamplight, blood still crusted in his ear from the recoil of last night's gun. "I don't want Daphne harmed," he said. "I've loved her since she was in pigtails. Loretta paid me to keep the plates spinning, but this has spun far beyond fees." "You shot a man," I reminded. "Because he'd have killed you then." "Me, then Daphne if needed," Weston said, voice cracking. "Haskins isn't their banker, he's their cleaner." I processed that, heartbeat drumming. "What do you want, Weston?" "Immunity," he said. "I testify, you give me a copy of Isaac's files, and the police place me under protection. In return, I tell you where they took the key." "Someone has it already?" He nodded. "A courier left town before dawn, heading to Boston, Harcourt's private vault." Boston, over 3 hours away. Detective Sullivan could mobilize state police, but jurisdiction tangles could stall. Rain pattered against the study window, faint at first, then louder. A curtain drawing between us and the world. I lowered the shears slightly. "You'll ride with me to the station. You breathe one lie, and the immunity deal evaporates." Weston sagged in relief. "Fine." Footsteps pounded below. Daphne called, "Aunt Callie? There's a car." Tires screeched. In the drive. Headlights swept the foyer wall. A male voice barked orders outside. Weston's face drained of blood. "Too late," he whispered. Glass shattered downstairs. Daphne screamed. I thrust Weston behind the study door. "Touch anything and I finish what I started," I hissed. I bolted, leapt the last 3 stairs. In the foyer, 2 men in tactical. Black dragged Daphne by the arms. Duct tape sealed her mouth. One aimed a pistol up the stairwell. I ducked behind the banister. The bullet splintered oak. "Give us the book," one shouted, accent clipped British. "Now, or the girl leaves." In pieces. My mind snapped to Isaac's journal on the dining table. Plain sight. Another voice. This one, Mark Harcourt himself, emerging from the shadows beyond the door. Smooth. Cold. "Time is precious, Ms. Pierce." I scanned the room, one toppled. Console, umbrella stand. Shards of the blown mixing bowl glittering on the floor. My shears felt like a butter knife against their hardware. Then Weston stepped into the upstairs landing, hands raised, waving a white legal envelope. "I have it," he lied. Harcourt's eyes narrowed. "Bring it down, slow." Weston descended, every step an exercise in visible tremor. At the midpoint he turned, met my gaze, mouthed "Run." He leapt, slamming the envelope into the face of the closest gunman. Papers exploded like snow. Daphne twisted free, kicked. The man's grip faltered. surged forward, launching the umbrella stand. The brass pole smashed against the second gunman's wrist. The gun skittered under the sideboard. Daphne tore the tape, screamed, "Police are coming!" Her voice ragged but fierce. Harcourt snarled and lunged for Isaac's journal. Weston grabbed his arm. They wrestled. Blue lights strobed through the blown window. Detective Sullivan's cruiser screeching in. Chaos erupted. A melee of limbs, papers, thunder, sirens. I felt a cracking blow to my shoulder, spun, disoriented. Weston bellowed as Harcourt's elbow hammered his jaw. Daphne caught the journal, clutched it like a newborn. Gunfire cracked, a single shot. Plaster burst inches from my ear. Sullivan's voice roared commands. Harcourt's men dove through the broken window, fleeing into rain and sirens. Harcourt himself froze, fists empty, nostrils flared like a cornered stallion. Sullivan trained her pistol. Officers poured in, but Weston sagged to his knees, blood streaming from his stomach. Harcourt's bullet. The hallway smelled of gunpowder and wet earth. As paramedics rushed again into my home, my battered sanctuary, Harcourt locked eyes with me. Ice meeting steel. "This isn't over," he whispered while cuffs cinched his wrists. I believed him, because the key was still gone, the proof still vulnerable. And Weston's life hung on threads. And outside, sirens wailed a dirge that promised the next chapter would demand every ounce of strength I still possessed. Lightning flared, thunder rolled, and somewhere far off, Boston's skyline waited, indifferent and hungry. Cliffhanger thrust its blade into the night and twisted until even the house seemed to bleed anticipation. Morning broke like glass. Shattered fragments of pale light scattered over everything the night had broken. Police cruisers still idled in the drive, their engines sighing clouds into the cold dawn. Yellow tape bandaged my porch railings. Forensic. Technicians photographed bullet holes, bloodstains, the scatter of Harcourt's imported muscle. My house, once the quiet keeper of widowed routine, resembled a war crime scene. Detective Sullivan leaned against her cruiser, fatigue carving harsh lines around her mouth. An EMT tightened the sling around my bruised shoulder while Sullivan briefed me. Weston had survived surgery. Barely. A perforated intestine, fragmented rib, collapsed lung. He remained unconscious, guarded by state police. Harcourt sat in county lockup, but his lawyers were already greasing wheels. The two mercenaries vanished. A rental van traced to false IDs. And the key? I asked. Interpol flagged license plate recognition on I-93 north of Worcester, Sullivan said. Troopers tried to stop. Van evaded, possibly headed to Logan Airport. We alerted TSA. I glanced at the sky. Low clouds bruised purple. If they go international, we'll never see that key again. Sullivan's jaw flexed. I've pushed as far as my badge allows. Above this, you hit federal turf and diplomatic fog. Then we take a shortcut. I reached into my coat pocket, produced the SD card labeled Violet 17B. Isaac's contingency. We leak the truth before they can bury it. Sullivan smiled, grim. Whistleblower style? Full volume, I said. Harcourt's empire relies on silence. We'll give him an avalanche. Daphne emerged from the house, journal in her arms, eyes red from weeping yet flint-hard. She nodded at Sullivan, then at me. We do this now. We piled into Sullivan's cruiser, radio crackling with units coordinating interstate pursuit. I clutched Isaac's USB drive in my good hand, the other bound tight in soft cotton. My pulse felt like footsteps on cracked ice. The Brackenridge Gazette occupied a brick storefront downtown. Hardwood floors varnished by a century of ink spills, the air thick with the musk of newsprint and caffeine. Editor-in-Chief Mora, Delgado greeted Sullivan like a fellow soldier. She raised an eyebrow at my sling. The bruising, the journal. Biggest scoop since Watergate? She quipped. Something like that, I said, handing her the USB and SD card. You'll want multiple backups and legal counsel on standby. Delgado powered a laptop, inserted the drive. Her brows climbed as she watched the folders populate. Financial records, video testimony, scanned confession letters. "Sweet Holy Mother," she breathed. "This is nuclear." "And no embargo," I said. "Publish as soon as your lawyers greenlight. We need the world reading before Harcourt's lawyers wake." Delgado nodded. "Give me 4 hours." She turned to her reporters. "Lockdown, phones off, privacy shades down. No leaks until we control the narrative." We left the Gazette buzzing like a hive agitated into righteous purpose. 4 hours stretched into 6 as forensic accountants verified digits, reporters cross-checked Shell Corp addresses, and Delgado negotiated with outside counsel who demanded hazard pay. Sullivan paced like a caged wolf. Daphne and I alternated coffee with bottled water, nerves too frayed for food. At 2:27 p.m., Delgado pressed publish. A digital roar followed. Social media feeds erupted, Jack Harcourt files trending. Within 20 minutes, cable news anchors stammered through breaking banners. Within an hour, the state attorney's office announced a grand jury probe. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The effect was immediate. Federal marshals seized Harcourt's local bank branches. The Department of Justice scheduled a press conference. Daphne watched it all unfold on her phone, hands trembling hard enough to blur the screen. But elation curdled into fear when Sullivan received a call from Boston PD. The rental van had crashed on Revere Beach Parkway. Both mercenaries dead, single, gunshots to the head, execution style, no key recovered. Someone cleaned loose ends before the avalanche hit. "We're up against something larger," Sullivan muttered. "International laundering," I said. "Those accounts stretch across continents. Whoever holds that key stands between Harcourt's empire and complete collapse." "And they're not done cleaning," Sullivan added. Evening draped itself over Bracken Ridge. I insisted on visiting. Weston in intensive care. The hospital corridors felt déjà vu, the antiseptic bite sharper. Weston lay pale, tubes in his throat, monitors weaving peaks and valleys. A uniformed officer at his bedside nodded as we entered. I leaned close. "If you can hear me, we published. They'll come for you again. Hold on, Weston. Daphne owes you a thank you." His eyelids twitched, but no more. As we turned to leave, the ICU phone rang. The nurse answered, then paled. "Ms. Pierce? Call for you." Puzzled, I took the receiver. A distorted voice filtered through static. "You thought an avalanche would bury me, Caledonia," it said. "But avalanches only reveal what lies beneath." "Harcourt?" A low chuckle. "Harcourt is a useful fool. You seek the key? Come to where it began. Isaac's grave, midnight, the..." Line disconnected. I stared at the handset, blood evaporating from my limbs. Sullivan's expression hardened. "Trap." "Of course," I whispered, "but we have no choice." The cemetery perched on a hill south of town, marble angels presiding. Over rows of weather-worn headstones, a November wind rifled dead leaves into restless eddies. Patrol cars ringed the perimeter, headlights off. Sullivan adjusted her bulletproof vest. Daphne clutched a flashlight, lips taut. I approached Isaac's grave, granite polished, engraving simple. Beloved husband, botanist, dreamer. The date of death 3 years ago to the day tomorrow. A figure stood opposite the stone, silhouetted by moonlight. Tall, lean, a trench coat whispering around boots. The scarred cheek caught silver glow. The intruder from the carriage house. No. Weapon visible. In his hand, a small velvet pouch. He raised it. "The key," he announced, "and an offer." Sullivan stepped forward, gun drawn. "Hands where I can see." He complied, slow, deliberate. "I am called Rurik," he said. Accent Eastern Bloc, syllables clipped. "I work freelance, not for Harcourt nor Weston." "Then for who?" I asked. "For myself," he said. I find value in leverage. He tossed the pouch. It landed at my feet. Metal clinked softly. Sullivan motioned to an officer. They retrieved it. Confirmed. The key. Why return it? Sullivan demanded. Because payment changed. Rurik smiled. No humor. Information worth more than currency. He pulled a phone from his coat, tapped the screen. A video began. Daphne, bound, gagged, eyes wide with terror. Recorded hours earlier in ICU hallway. I spun. Daphne stood behind me, alive, safe. She gasped at her double. Rurik pocketed the phone. Deepfakes confuse time. The world is malleable. What? Do you want? I asked. Isaac's research? He said. Not the financial scandal. The biological specimens cataloged in his journals before he died. I frowned. The orchids? The meteorological logs? Rurik's eyes glinted. The seed vault coordinates. An icy fissure opened in my memory. Isaac's final project, whispered on hospital nights, preserving endangered alpine flora in cryogenic vaults. He believed patenting their genomes could fund conservation. I thought it fanciful grief therapy. Those coordinates weren't in the safe deposit box, I said. No, Rurik replied. They burned in the carriage house, but I believe you memorized them. I had. Every decimal, sung by Isaac in morphine twilight. I'd etched them behind my eyelids. Rurik glanced at the cops encircling. Trade the coordinates for Daphne's. Continued health and yours. His smile turned razor thin. I work alone, but I am not alone. Sullivan lifted her radio. Rurik raised a palm. Transmit and my sniper disables your lungs in 200 meters. A red dot blossomed on Sullivan's vest. She froze. The night held its breath. I felt Isaac's headstone cold against my calves. Seeds of lost flowers weighed suddenly heavier than the journal, heavier than Harcourt's empire. Give me proof Daphne lives, I said. He gestured to Daphne beside me. She lives now. The video is a warning. Another could be a reality. A second dot appeared, this one dancing on Daphne's shoulder. She whimpered. Sullivan's voice was stone. That shot reveals his position. By the time you aim, Rurik countered, another dot will be on Ms. Pierce's heart. I closed my eyes. Isaac's coordinates flared across the darkness. Numbers, entwined with vows. Protect life. Yet here life stood hostage, my voice barely above wind. The vault is beneath Mont Cenis Glacier, French Alps. Access code is 1848 heliotrope. That's all I know. Rurik's smile deepened. He nodded. Adequate. He stepped back, merging with the grave's shadows. Sullivan's radio crackled. Sniper. Triangulated, but the dots vanished. Silence swallowed the hill. Officers fanned out. Searchlights sliced tombstones. Found nothing. The key remained in my fist, but my heart felt hollowed. I had traded the future of endangered flora for minutes of uncertain safety. Sullivan holstered her weapon. We'll notify Interpol. They'll lock down every lab in Europe. But I knew the world was vast, and money could tunnel through any mountain. Daphne clutched my arm. What have we done? I stared at Isaac's name, moonlight silvering. The carved letters. We've bought time, I murmured. Now we must decide what to do with it. Sullivan's phone buzzed. She answered, listened, face turning ashen. Weston flatlined, she whispered. They think poison in his IV. A chill carved my spine. Rurik's helpers already cleansing traces. I closed my eyes against the night, but darkness pressed in from within and without. Gravestones watched, silent and unjudging, as sirens approached again. A dirge stretched thin. The chessboard had flipped. Now every piece was fragile glass. And far away, a glacier dreamed of seeds it might never cradle. I tightened my grip on the cold metal key, feeling its edges bite, promising either salvation or ruin. The wind rose, carrying whispers of snow from distant mountains, and I knew the next move would demand sacrificing something dearer than land or money. For behind us, headlights crested the hill, unmarked, engine growling, and the cemetery shadows shifted anew. I braced, heart hammering, as the car door opened and a figure emerged holding an object I recognized immediately. Isaac's USB drive. Impossible. And everything inside me screamed. I screamed. Internally, a silent shriek that ricocheted through ribs and skull, because terror had dried every last atom of breath in my lungs. My voice refused passage, so the sound clawed its asylum within me, vibrating in the hollows of bone. Moonlight spilled over the intruder's shoulders as he stepped fully into view, the USB drive dangling from gloved fingers like some talisman stolen from the underworld. He was neither police nor one of Harcourt's Tux and Titanium enforcers. His profile was softer, shadowed by a trim beard silvered at the chin, eyes a weary green instead of Rurik's glacial blue. Yet menace radiated from him nonetheless, a coiled patience as if he prepared to talk rather than shoot, but only for as long as talk served his end. Detective Sullivan lifted her Glock, two-handed stance, red dot sight settling on his sternum. "You are trespassing on restricted grounds," she barked, voice sharp enough to split the frost-tinged air. Squad lights bathed the cemetery in pulses of blue, turning headstones into stuttering ghosts. Officers flanked us, weapons raised. The man raised his free palm in a gesture of surrender, though the drive never wobbled. "Easy," he said, accent indeterminate, mid-Atlantic washed by years abroad. "I'm here to return what belongs to Mrs. Pierce." He tossed the drive gently. It arced silver before landing in a tussock at my feet. Instinctively, I crouched, fingers closing around the familiar black plastic still warm from his hand. The heat startled me. Isaac's lingering warmth? No. Nonsense. My mind chased any foothold against dread. "I've followed your case, Miss Pierce," the stranger went on, eyes flicking to the muzzle of Sullivan's Glock. "I know what's on. That drive. And I know who would kill to erase it." "Name?" Sullivan demanded. "Gareth Wells. Private Investigations. London license 00771. Formerly employed by, Harcourt International to perform due diligence audits. When I uncovered certain discrepancies," he smiled, without mirth, "I was furloughed and placed on a watch list for corporate espionage." "You expect sympathy?" Sullivan asked. "I expect survival," Wells replied. "And perhaps redemption. You published the Harcourt files. Bravo. Yet the narrative lacks one final chapter." Daphne's grip tightened on my coat sleeve. Her pupils were blown wide, reflecting cruiser strobes. "What chapter?" she asked. Wells's eyes softened at her voice. "The one in which Harcourt leveraged biopiracy to corner futures in pharmaceutical markets, using Isaac's seed vault." My knees nearly gave. "Isaac never approved trading those genomes." "He didn't have to," Wells said. "Patent. Law favors the first filer. Harcourt planned to file once Rurik secured the coordinates. But there's more. Harcourt projects the glacier's melt will expose rare lithium veins beneath Mont Cenis. He'll mine it. Launder proceeds through shell charities, environmental goodwill masking ecological plunder." Sullivan lowered her Glock by a fraction. "Evidence?" "I downloaded it," Wells said, tapping a phone holstered at his hip. "Encrypted redundantly. If I go dark 5 minutes, it hits every major news outlet. But if I cooperate with federal agents?" His gaze locked on me. "And with Mrs. Pierce, perhaps we salvage more than reputations. We save life itself." A gust skittered dead leaves across Isaac's headstone, whispering like dry wings. My heart pounded as though the marble itself spoke. Trust? But trust had become a luxury I could not afford. "You'll come with us," Sullivan decided, slipping flex cuffs from her back pocket. Wells didn't resist as his wrists were bound. We'll compare your data to the Harcourt files. If you're lying, every leverage fails. I'm not, he said simply. Sullivan radioed dispatch to prep an interview room at the station. Officers escorted Wells to a cruiser. The cemetery regained its spectral hush, broken only by the far-off rumble of a late freight train. I exhaled a shiver that clouded moonlight. Daphne touched my elbow. Aunt Callie, the vault coordinates. You gave them up. My gaze traveled. The hill, where Rurik had melted into darkness with his sniper. Yes. But coordinates alone won't unlock Isaac's genetic algorithm. I lifted the recovered USB. This will. And if we must, we'll release every sequence to open science journals. Patent squatter's worst nightmare. Daphne's shoulders sagged with relief, tinged by terror of what came next. Can we beat them? We either do, I said, or we learn what failure tastes like. Sullivan's precinct glared sterile under fluorescent light, cubicles buzzing with telephones and jittery officers. She quarantined us in a glass-walled conference room, blinds half drawn. An FBI liaison, Special Agent Mara Singh, arrived within the hour. Sharp blazer, eyes like polished basalt. She took possession of Wells's phone, the USB drive, and Isaac's journal, logging chain of custody meticulously. We've red-tagged Harcourt's passport, Singh said, scanning a tablet. But corporate shellheads lobby hard. We need bulletproof charges. Wells sat cuffed at the table's far end. Dried mud flecked his trousers. He looked exhausted, as though he'd sprinted decades to arrive at this moment. Yet when Singh produced a laptop and projector, he straightened. Play the archive, he offered. The room dimmed. On the wall, schematics bloomed. Subterranean diagrams of Mont Cenis Glacier, seismic overlays predicting meltwater channels. Layers peeled back to reveal a cavern dotted by cryovault pods. Isaac's seed canisters marked in blue. Another overlay. Vein densities of lithium salts in aquifers beneath. Potential yield forecast in billions. A sinister footnote. Profit. Projections label-coded Nikon, Harcourt's Covert Extraction Division. Next, a video. Rurik conferring with Harcourt in a yacht cabin. Timestamp 3 months prior. Their conversation half-snatched by directional Mike Wells must have planted. Harcourt's voice purred across speakers. Once we patent those genomes and secure the lithium rights, Mont Cenis becomes our cornerstone. Environmental cover, philanthropic press, the widow's cooperation, optional. In the dark, I tasted bile. The video continued. Harcourt handing Rurik a dossier bearing Isaac's portrait, red circled. Widow holds key. Burn the rest. Singh paused playback. Enough probable cause for a RICO escalation, she said quietly. Low clatter sounded outside, the precinct doors swinging as a new figure entered. An officer poked his head in. Agent Singh, Justice just greenlit federal custody transport for Harcourt. He rolls in 10. Relief pulsed through me. Not victory yet, but momentum. Roughed coffee and stale bagels sustained us while cybertechs cloned data. Wells signed a provisional immunity agreement drafted with the speed of men racing a collapsing bridge. Still cuffed, he spoke without defiance, rather resignation. I was good at numbers, he said, almost to himself. I never thought numbers could rot until they grew fangs. Singh ignored introspection. We'll move you to a safe house after processing. Wells nodded. Night approached again, though it felt we'd never left its clutch. Federal marshals convoyed Harcourt from county lockup under floodlight glare. Through blinds, I glimpsed him. Immaculate pinstripe suit despite the cell, silver hair brushed. His icy composure did not crack even as wrist shackles clicked. Our eyes met across the foyer gap, an accidental line of sight. He dipped his chin, a viper acknowledging adversary. But as agents guided him into the armored van, a beige delivery truck squealed to a halt at the curb. Too mundane to raise alarm, until its cargo doors flew open and a barrage of flash grenades, belched magnesium fury. White light seared the foyer, then thunder. Windows burst inward. Shock waves flung officers like rag dolls. Alarms shrieked. My ears rang. Vision snowstormed with afterimage ghosts. "Down!" Sullivan roared, dragging Daphne and me below the table. Gunfire erupted, a concussive hail ricocheting, off steel reinforcement. Through strobing flashes, I glimpsed shapes in tactical gray flood into the lobby, weapons suppressed but lethal. Singh unholstered, taking return fire. Wells, still cuffed, crawled under projector cables. Sullivan shoved a service revolver into my palms, my good arm clenched around its weight. "If they breach this room, you shoot center mass, no hesitation." My jaw tightened in silent assent. Smoke grenades hissed. Choking haze rolled under glass door seams. The world tasted like burnt metal. Shadowed forms moved beyond the blinds. One slashed vertical with a combat knife, the blinds shredded. An assailant leveled an H&K across the conference threshold. I fired before fear found footing. The .38 roared, recoil jolting my bones. The glass spiderwebbed, the assailant folded sideways. Wells seized his chance. He heaved the metal projector stand, smashing the side window. Night air gusted. "Rooftop access! This way!" he shouted, surprising even himself with command. Daphne scrambled first. Sullivan covered fire. Singh dragged Wells. I followed, heart in throat. We spilled onto the fire escape landing amid sirens and bullet-pocked brick. Somewhere below, tires screeched. The truck peeled away. Harcourt presumed exfiltrated. We climbed, up 4 flights of iron ladder till lungs burned. The roof offered no safety. Helipad lights blinked red, downtown skyline shimmered, the wind cut like fractured glass. "Extraction?" Singh panted into her radio. Only static answered. Communications jammed. A helicopter thumped in distance, growing louder. Sullivan's eyes hardened. Not ours. Rotors battered the night. Spotlight peeled across rooftops until it fixed on us, white hot. We shielded eyes. A megaphone crackled with Rurik's voice. "Hand over the notebook and the USB, or the roof becomes your tomb." Wells shouted, "Coordinates already broadcast to Interpol. Kill us, you gain nothing." "And yet," Rurik replied, calm, "revenge has its own currency." The chopper's side door slid. A sniper aimed. Instinct slammed me flat. Bullets strafed the parapet, masonry exploding. Sullivan yelled something, lost beneath rotor howl. I crawled, dragging Daphne beneath an HVAC unit. Singh returned fire with bursts from an MP5 retrieved from fallen SWAT. Sparks danced off the helicopter's skid. Wells slumped behind ductwork, cuffs still binding. He met my gaze, eyes aflame with resolve. "Move," he mouthed, nodding toward a communications antenna anchored by thick coaxial cable. He rose into a crouch, sprinting under a barrage that stitched concrete at his heels. He reached the antenna base, grabbed the whip mast, and shoved with all his weight. It groaned, once, twice, then snapped, cables ripping free like jungle vines. The mast toppled, striking the helicopter's main rotor disc. Metal shrieked. The chopper yawed, tail swinging in wild arc. Rotor blades shredded themselves, debris scything the rooftop. Pilots fought controls, but inertia won. The machine spun, clipped the opposite parapet, and disappeared beyond, a comet of sparks. Seconds later, a deafening crash echoed from the alley, followed by a bloom of fire. Silence fell, save distant sirens. We stared, ears ringing, skin prickled with disbelief. Wells collapsed, wrists bleeding from the force of his effort. Sullivan hurried, unlocking cuffs. He gasped, "Told you! Numbers can rot." I knelt, pressing cloth to his wrists. Somewhere, inside, the part still capable of awe, I thanked a man who'd traded corporate comfort for uncertain grace. Below, precinct interior alarms continued, but rooftop calm felt surreal. stars flickering beyond city haze. SWAT reinforcements. 2 minutes out, Singh announced, her radio restored. But Harcourt's extracted. Sullivan cursed beneath breath. Daphne leaned against me, shaking. What now? I looked to the smoldering helicopter wreckage glow painting the clouds. Now we finish what Isaac started, before Harcourt reappears with deeper pockets, he sighed. Next 48 hours blurred, federal debriefings, protective detail relocation, briefing NATO Environmental Crime Task Force via secure.video. Wells's data cross-matched Isaac's algorithms. Harcourt's network flailed, assets frozen, associates disappearing into remote villas with private runways. Yet without Harcourt physically in custody, justice felt paper-thin. Sullivan visited Loretta in rehab ward. My sister-in-law, weaker but lucid, absorbed the saga with wide eyes. She signed a sworn statement confirming forged signatures and offshore transfers. In exchange, prosecutors granted her leniency and allowed home recovery under supervision. Daphne postponed her engagement, uncertain whether love could survive such detonation of trust. She and I relocated to a safe house overlooking Lake Champlain, an old ranger lodge loaned by the Marshalls. Autumn flamed across treetops, a beauty that felt almost cruel juxtaposed with the violence chasing us. One evening, as wind rattled window panes, Wells joined us at the table, ankle monitor blinking. He unfolded a map of Mont Cenis. Interpol upped patrols, he said, tracing glacier edges. But Rurick's employers may attempt incursion before winter snow seal passes. Sullivan, sipping burnt coffee, shook her head. We barely survived. Vermont. I won't drop citizens into the Alps. I'm not suggesting that, Wells replied. I propose we leak Isaac's cryovault location to Swiss environmental NGOs. They'll stage a legal occupation, turn the vault into a conservation site under public spotlight. Mining trucks hate cameras. My fingers brushed Isaac's USB, now enshrined in bulletproof evidence bag. Could publicity save the vault as it had crippled Harcourt? Perhaps. I nodded slowly. Do it, Sullivan exhaled. Another avalanche. I met her gaze. The only thing louder than bullets. It took 48 hours for media to swarm. The Alps. Drone footage of the cryovault door, frost stippled, painted with Isaac's Foundation logo, bloomed across screens worldwide. Student protesters chained themselves to survey stakes. Mountaineers formed human chains across the ice. Bridge. The Swiss Federal Council issued temporary preservation injunction. French authorities mirrored. Investors fled Harcourt's commodities arm, stock price nosediving 37% in a day. Harcourt responded with a manifesto posted on dark web. Accusations of eco-terrorism, claims of sabotage. His location remained a cipher. That night, while Sullivan briefed Washington, I stepped onto the lodge porch. Moon shimmered on the lake like a veil. My breath ghosted. Isaac would have loved this view. I closed my eyes, whispering gratitude to his memory, and apology for the bargains struck. A twig snapped. My eyes flew open. A silhouette stood at treeline, tall, lean, wearing the night-like fabric. A chill rooted me. Rurick, he couldn't have, survived the crash. I edged backward, hand seeking the revolver holstered under my cardigan. But the figure raised empty palms. Moonlight uncovered him. Not Rurick. Harcourt. He looked older, lines carved deep, clothes travel-stained yet still, tailored. His voice carried across the clearing like silk over blades. We're at a stalemate, Mrs. Pierce. Sirens mounted in distance, patrol returning. He risked everything coming here. Desperation glinted in his eyes. I propose a final transaction, he said, stepping into porch light. The WPA, Isaac's algorithm. In exchange, I vanish forever. No blood, no pursuit. I scoffed. You suppose I believe exile suits you? He shrugged. Believe what you wish. My network fractures. I can salvage only anonymity. Give me the algorithm and I leave the vault to your activists. And if I refuse? Harcourt's smile was sorrowed. Then you outlive Daphne by perhaps one sunrise. A click. A red laser dot appeared on my chest. He spread hands. My last loyal operator stationed across the lake. One call and the dot forgets restraint. My blood iced. I calculated. Patrol car 2 minutes out based on sirens. Could they neutralize a sniper hidden in dark woods? Risk unworthy. Harcourt. Extended a burner phone. One text, algorithm hashed to this number. Then we part. Sullivan's taught me negotiation buys seconds, but rarely souls. I glanced inside. Daphne visible through window, unaware, laughing with Wells over a burnt casserole. The red dot drifted to window frame. Warning. My thumb stroked USB bag edge in pocket. Could I bluff? Send corrupted hash? Buy more time? Perhaps. But Harcourt, master of due diligence, would verify. A wrong code invites that bullet. Sirens closer. Harcourt's gaze flicked toward road, impatient. I inhaled, heart shattering against ribs. Isaac's words echoed. Sometimes you must let the fool learn thirst. I accept, I whispered. I withdrew the bag, slit the seal. The USB gleamed. Slowly, I inserted it into my phone via OTG adapter. Cold sweat filmed my palms as directory. Listed. I navigated to Genome ALG, selected algorithm hash.txt. You'll let go of Daphne, I said, voice unsteady. On my children's graves, Harcourt vowed. He thought lying currency others still spend. My finger hovered. Send a spotlight. Cut the drive bathing us. Sullivan's voice thundered from behind. Drop everything! Harcourt lunged, yanking me close, positioning my body as shield. The phone tumbled, skittered across boards. He pressed a snub pistol under my ribs. Stand down, he roared. Officers. Froze, weapons trained. From the woods, the laser dot jittered from my chest to Sullivan's forehead. Proof the sniper watched. Harcourt hissed, pick up the phone. I reached, then stomped his arch spiraling downward. He grunted, grip loosening just enough. I elbowed his jaw, pain flaming my shoulder but adrenaline numb to it. The gun discharged, wood splintered beside me. Officers opened fire, controlled bursts. Harcourt convulsed, bullets punching torso. His eyes widened, mouth shaping surprise. He released me, collapsed. Across the lake, a single rifle shot cracked. Sullivan jerked sideways as the laser vanished. Her Kevlar caught the round. She staggered, but remained upright, returning 2 shots. No confirm of sniper. Chaos. Officers swarmed, scanning tree line with flashlights, dogs barking. I knelt beside Harcourt. Blood pooled under him, dark wine soaking cedar planks. He coughed, lips frothing. I could have changed world. You did, I said, tears hot. Just not the way you imagined. His gaze slid to sky, unfocused. Breath left him. Patrols found no sniper, only a spent shell casing nailed to pine trunk, initialed R. Daphne rushed onto porch, face death pale. She collapsed into my arms. Sullivan waved off medics, insisting on patch only, bruise blossoming. Near her collar. The USB drive lay cracked, bullet-grazed but intact. I gathered shards into evidence satchel. Moon dipped behind clouds. The chill deepened, yet relief warm and aching coursed through me. Threat buried beneath porch boards, though seeds of his damage still scattered continents. But inside my chest, a new terror budded. Rurik still roamed. The stalemate broken, but the board bloodied. And as I gripped Daphne, heart pounding, I understood. The endgame would not unfold in courts or glaciers, but in the space where vengeance meets redemption. Held tight, preparing for a finale none of us could yet name. The sky wept sleet the morning after Harcourt's blood cooled on my porch, as though Vermont itself sought to cleanse the deck of sins carved into cedar. Marshall Station tarps already covered the stained planks, but nothing muffled the memory of his final words. They rattled in my ears like coins in an empty jar. Inside the lodge, the fireplace crackled with an indifferent warmth. I sat at the dining table nursing tea that tasted of smoke and old grudges. Detective Sullivan leaned against the hearth, shoulder bandaged, a dark bruise blooming across collarbone where the sniper's bullet had kissed Kevlar. Wells perched before Isaac's battered laptop, fingers dancing across keys despite stitched wrists. Daphne draped a blanket over her shoulders, eyes reddened but resolute. Special Agent Singh delivered the morning brief via secure call. Interpol units had located Rurik's downed secondary helicopter in the Italian Alps. Pilot dead, seats empty. Border alerts pinged a forged passport crossing into Slovenia. The man slithered through cracks like meltwater. Interpol classes him Tier 1 threat, Singh said, voice tinny. But we suspect he's en route to Montsini's to salvage any chance of mining rights. NGOs on site report drones buzzing perimeter, likely scouting. And Harcourt's death? Sullivan asked. Creates power vacuum, Singh replied. Secondary shareholders scramble. If Rurik retrieves Isaac's algorithm, he can auction it to highest bidder, state actors included. She exhaled static. We can't allow that. I sipped tea, feeling its heat anchor me. Then we finish this at the vault. Daphne's head jerked. You're going? You can barely lift your arm. I'm going, I said, because Rurik will slaughter those students for a file he assumes still hidden. I must show him it's already lost to him. Wells looked up from laptop. I'll accompany. My testimony ties corporate chain to field ops. Sullivan shook her head. You're both under protective order. Flying to Europe invites ambush. Protection. Failed at the precinct, I reminded. Proactive beats reactive. Tea sloshed as I set the mug down. Resolve casting long shadows inside me. 42 hours later, our convoy wound through alpine switchbacks dusted with early snow. A NATO liaison secured diplomatic clearance. A half-squad of French gendarmes escorted our two-vehicle motorcade, Sullivan driving the lead SUV, Daphne and me in rear with Agent Singh. Wells occupied front passenger seat, laptop tethered to satellite hotspot. Overhead, a rescue chopper patrolled, its rotors thrumming like distant thunder. Montsini Glacier rose before us, a leviathan of blue ice and geological longing, its crevasses glowing turquoise under winter sun. At its foot sprawled a tent. City, NGO activists, climate scientists, reporters, flags from 15 nations snapped in wind. The cryovault entrance, once hidden, now sported scaffolding where volunteers installed solar-powered security cams. We arrived to cheers. Students recognized me from news feeds, waving banners. Seeds not greed, and Caledonia chirk courage. Their faith felt heavy. Hero myths rarely survive daylight, but it lifted Daphne's spirits. I saw her straighten, shoulders no longer. A question mark. Dr. Lucien Moreau, Swiss botanist overseeing site, greeted us at a makeshift command cabin. He shook my hand reverently. Madame Pierce, Isaac's dream surpasses even his notes. Over 2,000 species cryostable, some extinct and wild. His eyes shone. I swallowed a lump born of pride and sorrow. Then we guard it with our lives. Moreau's smile faltered. We may have to. He pulled up a drone feed. Snowmobiles ghosting along a ridge northwest. Logos obscured. Riders armed. Estimated arrival dusk. We all knew whose emissaries they were. Sullivan ordered perimeters fortified. French Alpine troops erected mobile barricades. Activists formed human clusters at choke points, chaining themselves together. Tension iced the air. Wells huddled with cyber specialists, syncing algorithm backups across decentralized servers. Even if vault computers burned, data would live in shards across the internet. As he typed, he nodded at Daphne seated nearby, translating protest flyers into Italian for local shepherd villages. Their earlier flirtation, quiet, cautious, reignited. In shared purpose, I visited the vault entrance. Frost plume curled as heavy door opened. Inside, a cathedral of silence. Steel racks, liquid nitrogen pipes venting white mist, rows of canisters labeled in Isaac's hand. I traced gloved fingers. Along one, Papaver alpinum SSP rheaticum, a fragile poppy from Tyrol he'd once compared to Hope. Hope now slept in metal wombs awaiting spring decades hence. I knelt, whispering, "We guard you, old love." Footsteps echoed. Sullivan approached. Satellite just pinged Rurik's heat signature 5 clicks north. He'll hit by sundown. Then we meet him on our terms. We convened strategy. The glacier's main service tunnel, an old WYTU supply passage, posed weakest defense. Sullivan stationed gendarmes with non-lethal rounds, wanting no martyr headlines. Activists lined ridgeline with flares for visibility. Snow began to fall, fat flakes swirling like feathers from torn pillows. Dusk bled into indigo. Wind sharpened, whipping tense. My shoulder ached deep, but adrenaline dulled edges. I paced outside command cabin, watching violet twilight brush peaks. A distant engine's growl rolled across ice. Headlamps pierced snow veil. 3 snowmobiles, sleek, black. They halted within shouting distance. Engines idled growling as beasts. Rurik dismounted first, face half-masked, goggles reflecting torchlight. 2 cohorts flanked, rifles cradled. We advanced, Sullivan, Singh, Wells, myself. Students chanted behind barricade, cameras live-streamed. Global audience hovered breathless. Rurik. Raised gloved hand, palm out, parley. Sullivan signaled squads to hold fire. He removed goggles, revealing bruise along temple from chopper crash. His eyes, dawn at sea blue, fixed on me. "Mrs. Pierce," he called, voice carried by wind. "We come for what belongs to progress." "Step aside." I took 1 pace forward. "Progress built on ash tastes of cinder, Rurik." He tilted head. "Pretty words, yet you handed over coordinates easily enough." "I handed you snow and stone. Algorithm split across 1,000 servers. Kill me, it won't die." He smiled, small. But fear for others still lives." He signaled. 1 cohort produced a satellite phone, pressed button. A video feed bloomed on screen. Loretta in hospital bed, eyes wide as a gun barrel, touched her temple, held by a masked nurse. Daphne screamed. My blood froze. Rurik spoke softly. "My contingency. 1 call ends her, another ends Weston." Wells cursed, fists tight. Sullivan muttered orders into radio, U.S. liaisons verifying hospital security breaches. I steadied breath. "You trade? Hostages for seeds? Surely you doubt my leverage now." "I believe in hedging," Rurik answered. "Deliver master copy of algorithm and shut down your live stream, or their monitors flatline." Snow whipped sideways. Cameras captured our standoff for millions. Cutting feed would gift him shadows. Sullivan's radio crackled. Hospital teams encountering automated gun turrets hacked interior network. My sister-in-law lay inside a digital cage. Rurik extended a ruggedized USB stick, open port glinting. "Copy it here. 10 minutes. Wells whispered to me, "We can embed a worm. Self-destruct algorithm once opened." "Too easy to detect," I murmured. My brain raced, then paused on story Isaac once told, "Some seeds need fire to germinate." Could destruction birth salvation? I raised voice. "Agreed. But release Loretta first." Rurik chuckled. Snow crusted his lashes. "Upload begins. Hostage released. Simultaneous." Sullivan hissed. "He'll kill her anyway." "Maybe," I said louder. "But fire unlocks seeds." I signaled Wells. He plugged Isaac's master drive into his laptop, initiated file transfer to Rurik's USB, but not the algorithm. Instead, he uploaded a 100-gigabyte decoy encrypted with a timer fuse. 90 seconds after transfer completion, it would overwriting device with randomized noise while broadcasting Rurik's geolocation and biometrics to Interpol drones overhead. A digital wildfire, file progress bar crawled, 15%, 40%. Wind howled. Activists chanted louder to drown tension. Rurik's gaze flicked to laptop screen, satisfied, 80%, 95%. Transfer done. Wells ejected drive, snow-steamed breath rapid. Rurik took it, sliding into pocket. He signaled cohort holding phone. On screen, nurse withdraw gun. Retreats. Loretta sobbed. Vitals beep steady. Weston's room feed appeared, unaltered, safe. Relief sagged my knees. For an instant, hope seemed possible. Then drones overhead buzzed louder, engines straining. Rurik frowned, reached for pocket. Too late. USB LED flashed red, a worm awakening. His sat phone screamed alert as coordinates pinged satellites. He snarled, realizing betrayal. "Guns!" he roared. Cohorts raised rifles. Gendarmes fired pepper rounds. The pellets burst orange powder. Snow filled with colored clouds. Activists cheered. Rurik fired live round. Shot struck Wells in thigh. He collapsed, blood soaking snow. Daphne screamed. Rushing to him, I lunged, tackling her back behind barricade. Bullets cracked. Sullivan returned fire, clipping Rurik's shoulder. He spun, but adrenaline kept him upright. Cohorts retreated to snowmobiles. Drones, now locked, descended like vengeful wasps. One fired non-lethal net projectile, ensnaring second cohort, dragging him into snow. Rurik mounted sled, throttled. Sullivan sprinted, leapt, grabbing rail. The machine dragged her yards. She clung like mountain cat. She swung, pistol whipping Rurik across helmet. He lost control. Sled veered toward crevasse. Time slowed. Engine wail, ice cracking. Sullivan. Falling clear, sled launching into abyss. Rurik pitched beside it, scrambling futilely as lip crumbled. He slid, vanished into crevasse's blue mouth. Silence followed, then the distant echo of sled's crash far below. Sullivan lay prone, breath clouds. Medics rushed. I crawled to Wells, applying pressure to wound. Daphne tore scarf as tourniquet. Wells grimaced but managed weak smile. Numbers. Sometimes add up right. NGO banners whipped, lights of streaming drones painting sky. Globally, millions watched corruption quite literally fall into Earth's ancient wounds. It took rescue climbers 3 hours to descend crevasse. They recovered sled wreckage and one rifle, no body. Ice tunnels could run miles. A blood trail ended where subterranean meltwater carried on. Authorities classified Rurik missing, presumed dead. I suspected we'd not see him again, unless future demanded a ghost. Wells underwent surgery at Geneva Hospital. Bullet missed femoral artery by millimeters. Daphne refused to leave his bedside, read him climate science articles while he drifted on anesthesia. Loretta recovered under Marshall. Guard! Humility sewed through her like new thread. Rehabilitation included community service raising funds for vault conservation, a penance she accepted. Harcourt Estate splintered, shareholders deposed board, pledging reparations to environmental causes. The world devoured scandal, yet within that calamity, seeds of actual change sprouted. Within a month, Mont Cenis Cryovault was designated UNESCO World Heritage Site, co-managed by Isaac Pierce Foundation and Swiss-French Consortium. Students planted flags of every nation represented in the seed bank. On opening day, I delivered keynote from a platform carved of reclaimed glacier wood. I spoke of loss, resilience, and the simple defiance of planting something small in a world determined to raise forests. Cameras broadcast to classrooms worldwide. Daphne took stage next, voice quaverless. She announced new initiative pairing vault data with open-source AI to predict habitats for rewilding. Children cheered across continents. After ceremony, she and Wells strolled Ridgepath, his crutch slicing snow. They paused near a cluster of Papaver alpinum seeds sown in heated planter boxes. I watched him slip an arm around her, both faces, bright despite mountain cold. Sullivan, leaning on railing beside me, murmured, "Still think numbers rot?" I smiled. "Only when left in darkness." We fell quiet, watching sunset paint glacier burnished gold. The cryovault door gleamed, no longer secret, but sanctified by collective hope. A gentle wind sighed through prayer flags, carrying faint scent of alpine herbs. I closed my eyes, imagining Isaac's laughter tumbling down from peaks, mingling with wind chimes of carabiners tapping poles. When I opened them, I felt lighter. Not unburdened, the past remained, but balanced, as though grief and gratitude held each end of the scale. Sullivan tapped my sling. "Doctors cleared you to retire this fashion accessory?" "Next week?" I chuckled, rotating shoulder carefully. "Think? You'll miss the firefights?" "Not at all," I said. "But I might miss the clarity death threats provide." She laughed, a rare, throaty sound. Night crept, stars ignited. Students lit paper lanterns, releasing them across glacier like constellations unmoored. One drifted close. I caught its bamboo rim, watching candle flutter. On its rice paper skin, someone had penned, "From ashes grow forests." I released it, eyes following glow skyward until it blurred among many, each flame a promise stitched to the firmament. As last lantern vanished, I turned toward the lodge nestled below ridge, warm light beckoning. Daphne called, voice echoing like bells, inviting supper. I took first step down snow-packed path, cane crunching gently. Sullivan paced beside. Wind carried smell of cumin and cocoa from kitchen tents. Behind us, glacier groaned, ancient, immense. But for the first time, its song sounded not like mourning but breathing. Ahead, life awaited, messy, fragile, luminous. And I walked toward it, unafraid. I stood at the crest of the glacier one last time, the snow beneath my boots packed hard by 2 early winter storms and the passing feet of scientists, students, gendarmes, and journalists who had turned Mont-Cenis into a beacon. The air smelled of ozone and pine resin drifting up from the larch forests below. It tasted of endings and beginnings braided together so tightly you couldn't pull one free of the other. Behind me, the cryovault's titanium door gleamed a pale gold. In the low sun, the color of a bruise healing. Technicians were sealing the final expansion chamber that would double the vault's storage in the coming decade. They moved with a reverence that reminded me of acolytes tending an altar, and in a way that's exactly what they were. Guardians of potential. Caretakers of every fragile tomorrow still hidden in the bright marrow of a seed. It had been 3 months since the siege, 3 months since Rurik slipped through ice and rumor into the realm of ghost stories, 3 months since Mark Harcourt's blood cooled on the cedar of my Vermont porch and his empire of forged signatures, offshore phantoms, and lithium dreams toppled to its knees. In those months, I'd learned that evil does not dissolve just because you strike down its most visible face. It thins, it seeps, and like black mold, it seeks the forgotten corners where you least expect it. But I'd learned something else as, well, goodness, stubborn, ordinary goodness, spreads in much the same way. Every student who raised a banner, every ranger who patrolled a ridge, every pensioner from Turin who mailed €5 to the Legal Defense Fund, they were spores of hope, and hope is the hardiest weed in the world. Daphne's laughter rang across the snowfield. She was below me on the test plots, crouched beside a line of heated trays embedded in the fern. A cluster of alpine poppies, Papaver alpinum, Isaac's darling, swayed in the sheltered warm, petals of fierce marigold, against the monochrome of ice. Daphne plucked a single spent bloom, snipped its seed capsule, and slipped it into a glassine envelope marked for the Geneva Seed Lab. At her side, Wells balanced on his rehabilitated leg, crutch sunk in snow, reading out measurements. His cheeks, flushed with cold or with the nearness of my niece, I would not guess which. The bullet wound had left him with a limp and a ledger of nightmares. But every dawn he rose before the sun to hike the access trail, notebooks dangling from his belt, like a technomancer's spellbooks. Numbers, he'd told me, had stopped rotting the moment he used them to grow something instead of merely count it. Detective, now inspector, Sullivan stood a few meters away, binoculars scanning the ridges out of long habit. The French had awarded her the Médaille de la Gendarmerie. The Swiss had given her a ceremonial cowbell the size of a child's head. She treasured the bell more, said it reminded her justice should make noise. Her collar still bore the thin scar where a sniper's bullet had bruised her, but she wore it like a medal as well, proof that a life spent protecting others would inevitably invite shrapnel. I let my gaze drift across the serrated skyline. At this height, the horizon looked close enough to touch, as if I could lay the flat of my palm against the sky's cool cheek and feel the planet's pulse underneath. Clouds rolled in slow caravans, casting shadows that marched like silent troops along the snowfields. Somewhere to the east, beyond 3 ridgelines and an international border, the remnants of Harcourt's board were still squabbling with auditors and prosecutors, agonizing over plea agreements and restitution funds. The world's 24-hour news cycle had already begun to digest their crisis into a cautionary tale to be regurgitated whenever a fresh scandal surfaced, but the vault would remain, quiet and bright, long after the pundits moved on. Radio on my hip crackled. "Caledonia, this is base. Transport team ETA 10 minutes. Over." I pressed the transmit key. "Acknowledged, Jacques. Let the pilot know we'll be ready." My own voice sounded to me like snowmelt running under ice, hushed but sure of its destination. Today was the beginning of my long walk home. The departure ceremony was held in a canvas mess tent that roared against the wind like a ship's sail. Tables scavenged from research huts formed a horseshoe. On their surfaces stood dozens of jars, preserves, pickled chanterelles, cloudberry jam, honey so dark it looked like amber sap, gifts from villagers and climbers and refugee families who'd walked 2 days from the valley just to volunteer for one afternoon. Each jar bore a handwritten label in a different script: Cyrillic, Tamil, Arabic, and a green sticker that read, "For Cali." I told them I'd need a second freight pallet to ship them all. They told me the world would always make room for sweetness if you gave it half the chance. Dr. Moreau tapped a spoon against a thermos. The chatter ebbed. He cleared his throat. "Amis, chers collègues, aujourd'hui nous disons au revoir à une dame qui nous rappelle que ce naissance n'est pas un mot pour les cœurs, only for the cells." Laughter rippled. Madame Caledonia Pierce has offered this project not just her late husband's legacy, but her indomitable fire. She protected our seeds with blood and bone. We cannot repay such a debt, so we will transform it into seeds of our own. He gestured toward a wooden crate stamped with the vault's logo. Inside are 200 vials of Anemone Caledoniae, a new alpine cultivar developed from Isaac's notes and germinated here under her guardianship. It is named for her. We will send it to botanical gardens on every continent. My throat stopped working. When the applause fell quiet, I managed. Only, "Thank you," but I poured a lifetime of gratitude into the 2 syllables. Sullivan raised a tin cup. "To Callie, may retirement be dull as dishwater because she damn well deserves it." The toast was taken with coffee laced liberally with cognac. I clinked cups with students whose names I barely knew, yet whose futures I already cherished. One shy young man from Lahore told me he had decided to specialize in cryogenics because Pakistan's mountain ecosystems were losing glaciers faster than textbooks could measure. He wanted a vault of his own. I told him to write me when he drafted the charter. The Pierce Foundation would help. Wells found me by the exit flap. He looked uncomfortable, which for a man who had once dismantled a multi-billion-dollar crime syndicate with a single data dump was saying something. I wanted you to see this before you go. He handed me a plain envelope. Inside lay 2 boarding passes, Geneva to Boston, business class, departing in 12 days. The passenger, names, Gareth Wells and Daphne Pierce. I searched his eyes. Are you asking for my blessing or giving me notice? Both, maybe, he said. We're going to speak with her university about a joint program, Vermont and Lausanne, remote semesters. If it works, she'll finish her master's without losing the vault. If it doesn't, he shrugged. We'll improvise. I hugged him, careful of his stitches. My blessing came the day you used your crutch as a tent pole during the blizzard so she could finish her pollen counts. Go. Grow something. He blinked fast and nodded. The helicopter that ferried me back across the glacier was a civilian Eurocopter painted a ridiculous shade of lemon yellow. The pilot called himself Eve and whistled Vivaldi through a peppermint candy as he lifted us into bruised blue sky. Sullivan squeezed my hand once, hard, then climbed into the second chopper with 2 Swiss marshals. Our radio channel stayed open. Her voice painted altitude reports like breadcrumbs behind us. The valley unfolded beneath in dizzying plats of river and scree. I pressed my forehead to the window, spotting the ribbon of trail where I'd first climbed up months ago, shoulder in a sling, rage in my mouth. I saw the ridge where Rurik's snowmobile had tumbled into white silence. I wondered if he lay entombed in ice, bones waiting for some future thaw the way seeds waited, patient, unafraid of time. If so, perhaps he too would be claimed by the glacier, broken down into minerals that would feed next summer's poppies. Nothing is ever fully lost in a living world. It merely translates. At Geneva, we transferred to a Marshall convoy. Bureaucracy moved slower than glaciers, but my exit papers were in order. Residence permits signed. An Interpol officer returned, Isaac's fountain pen, found in Rurik's abandoned pack. I twisted the cap and discovered the reservoir still half full of archival-grade ink. The nib, gold, and fine gleamed like a promise. On the flight to Boston, I wrote letters longhand. One to Loretta, telling her the house in Brackenridge was hers outright. I'd paid off the bank with the first tranche of reparations from Harcourt's estate. Another to the Brackenridge Library Endowment, instructing them to build a greenhouse wing in Isaac's name. A third to Daphne. That one cost me more ink than the others combined. I told her not to marry quickly, neither to escape pain nor to preserve it, but to let the engagement be a seed that chooses its own season. I told her Wells was a good soil, but even good soil sometimes needed turning. When the plane touched, Logan Tarmac, the night was bitter cold. Snow dashed against the terminal glass like handfuls of salt. In that hiss of white noise, I heard Vermont calling. 2 weeks later, I stepped back across my own threshold. The porch had been rebuilt, new cedar planks, planed smooth, sealed with linseed that smelled like warm bread. The bullet holes in the kitchen wall had been patched, sanded, painted. Only I knew where to look, and even I had to squint. The carriage, house remained a ruin, charred beams black as the inside of a chimney against winter sky. But I had plans. Architect's drawings waited on my desk, a community workshop for Brackenridge High's carpentry program, with a greenhouse annex seated by the first American shipment from Mont Cenis. Burned things could bloom if you tended them. Loretta visited on Christmas Eve. She walked with a cane now, and the smugness that once orbited her like a guardian moon had been scorched off. We spoke in the parlor where Isaac's leather armchair still watched the window. She apologized in a voice stripped bare of lacquer. I told her forgiveness was not a ledger entry, but an ecosystem. Messy, interdependent, sometimes slow to regrow. When she wept, I fetched the embroidered handkerchief that had belonged to her mother. She took it like a fragile seedling, clutching the memory of gentler lineage. Weston did not join us. He'd taken a teaching position at a community college in Maine, lecturing on business ethics with the zeal of a soul who had lost its compass and forged a new one from scrap. Daphne and Wells visited him en route to Boston. They said his classroom walls were plastered with newspaper clippings of our saga, annotated in red marker, "Don't do this." New Year's Day dawned in a hush. I rose before sunrise, brewed the site, 3 scoops of Sumatra the way Isaac taught me, and carried the steaming mug to the back porch. Snow blanketed the orchard, each branch wearing a glove of white. The eastern sky kindled rose, then amber, then a sudden ferocious gold that lit every ice crystal. For a moment the world looked like it was stitched from fire. I felt Isaac beside me, not as memory, but as echo, low and steady. The brass key to the workshop hung from my wrist, warm from my pulse. I unlocked the ruins door. Inside, the skeleton of beams smelled faintly of smoke even after snowmelt had rinsed the worst. I ran a hand along a charred post. The wood flaked off like black lace, revealing pale heartwood beneath. It reminded me of my own scarred ribs, cracked but still housing a heart unburned. I set the blueprint tube on a sawhorse, unrolled parchment. Morning light slanted through the broken roof, illuminating the page. Greenhouse walls of glass, benches for seedlings, solar panels on the south pitch. A classroom corner with stools fashioned from reclaimed stumps. A bronze plaque, the Isaac and Caledonia. Pierce Center for Renewal. Footsteps crunched behind me. Daphne's voice called, "Need a forewoman?" She and Wells entered with tool belts slung over parkas, cheeks ruddy from cold. Sullivan followed holding a tray of muffins and a thermos of cocoa. Loretta, slower but determined, carried a spool of bright ruby twine, the same piece Isaac had once used to hang the carriage house key. She pressed it into my palm. "I thought we might frame the first nail with this," she said. I nodded, throat tight. Together we tied the twine around the first reclaimed beam. Sullivan struck the nail. Daphne steadied the post. Wells read off measurements. I held the twine taut. When the hammer drove metal through wood, a sound rang out, clear, resonant, like the toll of some small jubilant bell. Outside the orchard stood silent witness, branches catching the first breeze of the year, and in that hush I felt the pivot of seasons, the shift from aftermath to aperture, to the opening of whatever came next. Spring arrived in shy increments. Snow receded into the shadow side of hedgerows. Crocus spears pierced thaw-soft earth. Sap buckets tapped maples along the lane. Each dawn, I walked the ridge trail behind the orchard. From its crest, I could see the workshop's glass roof glinting, like a low star. Inside the greenhouse cells, trays already sprouted green, tiny Anemone Caledonia seedlings, first of their lineage born on American soil. They trembled in the morning draft like infants breathing. One afternoon, I found Loretta, kneeling by the plot, coaxing moisture sensors into loam. She looked up, embarrassment and pride warring on her face. "The physiotherapist recommends gentle crouching," she said. "Figures I'd end up gardening." "I always said dirt looked good on you," I replied. She smiled, a real smile, unsharpened by envy. News arrived that same evening. Rurik's body had been discovered by glaciologists over a kilometer from the crash site, entombed in tunneled ice, hand clutching a data stick fused by cold. The press spun mythologies of the mercenary entombed by the very mountain he sought to plunder. I felt no triumph, only a small, sad release, like exhaling a tension I didn't know I still carried. Weeks later, I spoke at Brackenridge High's commencement. The greenhouse, not yet finished, served as backdrop. Timber skeleton hung with carpentry students' paper cranes. I told graduates that stories were seeds. Some grew weeds of cruelty, some forests of wonder. Their task was to choose which to scatter. I ended with Isaac's favorite line. "Mercy isn't an infinite well, but hope is. The applause felt like rainfall. After the ceremony, I lingered by the greenhouse. Dusk-turning glass panels rose. A hummingbird hovered among scaffolding, confused by reflections of sky. I held out my hand. She darted near, wings blurring, then vanished into lilac. I smiled because she reminded me of Daphne. Quick, bright, impossible to cage. Nights became gentle. Crickets stitched quiet songs into orchard grass. Fireflies blinked above seedling trays. I often sat on the back porch long past midnight, fountain pen scratching letters to activists in Nepal, orchardists in Alberta, primary school, children who mailed me drawings of glaciers with smiling faces. I told each of them the same secret. The world is vast, the world is bruised, but the world still wants to heal if we give it even half a reason. I ended every letter the way Isaac ended his. In hope and soil, Callie. 1 July dawn, 3 poppies. Opened in the test plot, the first P. alpinum blooms in Vermont history. Their petals were not marigold as on Mont Cenis, but a fierce sunrise coral, as though they had carried the glacier's dawn inside them and were eager to share. I knelt, fingertips brushing silk petals. And there, with dew stealing warmth from my knuckles, I realized the story was finished, not in the sense of ending, but of filling, a vessel finally brimming. I walked back to the porch where coffee waited, steam-curling shapes that looked to me like maps of all the places these seeds would someday travel. Above the tree line, a hawk circled, its wings carving quiet arcs as precise as Isaac's ink lines. I followed its flight until it vanished into blue, so rich it hurt. I raised my mug toward that empty sky and spoke aloud for whoever still listened. Isaac, the glacier, the unborn forests. We did it, love. We made the world a little less lonely. A breeze answered, rustling leaves, pushing open the workshop door so that from where I stood I could see the seedlings dancing in their trays. And I smiled, ready for morning. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.